Welcome to Robotics Assemble. Today we're here with Councilmember Janice Zahn. Do you want to say hi? I'm Vedashnii.
I'm Simran.
And we're going to get started.
Okay, so I guess we can just start off at the top. So, any changes you've seen recently in education and STEAM?
Well, first of all, I would say that I'm excited to be here to talk about it because when I first started my journey and graduated in civil engineering, actually 35 years ago, it was really STEM. So STEAM is actually more of a newer addition where we really recognize that the arts is just as integral to science, technology, engineering, and math. Because at the end of the day, it really is about the creativity of the arts and innovation that makes all these other pieces work. And I think even more as we move into artificial intelligence, the art portion is even more important because it really creates that space for us to think more holistically about creativity and being curious. That sometimes when we think about science and experimentation, and then the rigor of math and the precision of the formulas, it can create a mindset that sets us into a space where we're not creating the very creativity that's important.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like especially with AI, the human touch is really important. And usually like STEM and art, they feel so disconnected. And they're like different kind of people, but they're so interconnected. I'm glad that's...
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you think the benefits of robotics are on child development and especially like incorporating STEAM and all of that?
I think it's a huge part of it. You know, my sense is that for a long time, we've thought of STEM and STEAM as this separate track that unless you are into the engineering and the sciences, that no one else should actually learn some of these same skills. But what I tell folks is graduating with an engineering degree, what I think it does is it helps me figure out how to problem solve, and it's a way of thinking that I think that it's important no matter what discipline you're in and what you're interested in doing. And so the more of that kind of curiosity mindset and working together in teams and really being willing to question and be curious about why things are the way they are should be embedded in all the different career choices that people might have. I think that the broader thinking of robotics and kind of STEAM thinking should be embedded in all child development.
Yeah, I agree, especially with like robotics. Like to most people it feels like if you're in robotics you're working on the bot, but it's so different from that. There's business, there's us imagery, there's so many other aspects that aren't just working on the like actual bot, and it's nice to see that there's a lot of different roles within this world of STEAM.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just exciting because I do think that what I've seen in the changes in robotics really talks to maybe our societal piece around the fact that it shouldn't be siloed into discrete boxes, that it really is this holistic way of thinking.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, when did you first learn about these opportunities in robotics, and how did it help you, like growing up and also now?
You know, it's interesting because if I think back to when I was growing up, robotics seems like something that only special people do and special people work on. Because if we really think about, right, what was the kind of robotics and automation and efforts it took to put a person on the moon, right, many years ago, you know, there's a lot of that kind of thinking. The difference, I think, is in access. So growing up, I would say that society doesn't necessarily say, oh, you're a girl, you should go into the sciences and become an engineer or be involved in robotics. And nowadays, I think that what we're creating is this access point where we're really saying that all the aspects of robotics, whether it's the engineering and the technical and the mechanical, physical aspects of the robots or the logical brain thinking that we're programming into the robot, or as you said, the marketing, the project management of this is a project that together you're building into our robot. I think that those are all pieces of thinking that are really important. And I would say growing up, it always felt as though there was this fragmentation of who had access to robotics that is different nowadays. And I think that's really amazing how far we've come.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like if you thought about a robotics team a bunch of years ago, and then you compared it to now, I feel like it's a lot more diverse now. There's a lot different composition of people in it.
Yeah, we've started our little diversity, equity, inclusion team, and there's a lead for that. So everything is we really want to make this as a key sort of aspect to our team, growing it. So touching on that, what's your opinion on the state of STEM and robotics right now?
I think we're really at a crossroads, and what I mean by that is with the advent of artificial intelligence and, chat GPT and the ability to automate a lot of pieces, we can really think about robotics from the standpoint of what do we actually want to automate with robotics, and what are the pieces that takes human thinking and brain power. And I do think we're in the cusp of how much do we want to trust in the automation and the robotics versus where we want to put the people brain power. And I do think it's an interesting time because although the robotics program is around a certain task and there aren't any, I'm going to say, consequences related to harm to humans, right? If you think about, though, robotics from the standpoint of medicine, and you say, well, what should be automated in robotics in, surgery? What should be things that humans should be doing versus robotics? It starts to get to a really interesting discussion, especially when we are in a place where I think there's a lot more demand for people and workers in all different disciplines than there are people. And so there's going to be a push to do more automation and more robotics. So where is that space where these things should be automated and these things should not? And that's going to be the most interesting part of, I think, that conversation. And to that end, my question might be, when you think of the students that are in the program, what do you think is in the future? Because the farther away we get to high school, I think that we start to maybe get shaped by society and what society and the systems think that we should be doing versus, I'm going to say, a much more broad open-mindedness of our youth, where I would like to think that education has created an open framework where many things are possible, whereas I think sometimes as adults we are conditioned to think that certain things are just not possible because we haven't been able to do it yet. And so we could create our own kind of artificial barriers.
Yeah, I think what really sets robotics apart is that it brings all these different types of people together. And even when we're doing stuff that feels really technical, like at kickoff, our whole team comes together. It's not just the people who are on mechanical. Everyone from business, everyone from imagery, everyone from every different sub-team comes together, and that brings all those new perspectives that you wouldn't usually see from someone who maybe writes programs or something like that. So I think that's what's really important.
Yeah. And then I think the other part of it is, if we want to think about just the precious value of human interaction and human thinking, what do we want to pivot more to robotics and automation so that we can create more space for the more higher level thinking and values that humans bring that maybe robots just are not quite to that level. And so I think that's the interesting part. When you think about autonomous vehicles, it's an area where that's self-driving cars. We've been talking about that for 20 years. It creates this interesting, I'm going to say, ethical dilemma where how do you program into the car scenarios where what is the decision if the choice is braking but hitting, X or hitting Y? And how do we program in those kind of moral, pathways and decision choices? I think becomes even more and more interesting over time.
Yeah, I think that's why the advent of artificial intelligence it's just helping the human touch. It just makes humanity and our morals more important because we're the ones that are dictating what goes into artificial intelligence. And yeah.
But to me, that's also, and I know that in some of the later questions you're going to talk about, the DEI aspects of this. And I do think that what is interesting is what kind of data gets fed into the artificial intelligence algorithms, and is that data, and we recognize that that data has its own flaws and bias embedded within it. So how do we ask questions in a way that creates that awareness that that bias is in there, so we don't just say that the data says 1 + 1 = 2, when in reality it's not truly 1 nor 1, and so the answer really isn't 2. It's something with nuance.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. So how do you think how helpful robotics is in future careers, especially with how you're saying all this stuff about artificial intelligence? Do you think it's going to prepare us for that and other youth for that and other stuff like that?
I do, with caution. Because again, I think about what robotics has been able to bring us. So I think about the places where the human precision is not perfection. So we think about open heart surgery and a lot of different surgical procedures and what robotics has been able to do, because it has a lot less deviation than the human, hands or brain thinking. So I think that there's a lot of benefits related to that. And then when we think about what are those tasks that are highly repetitive, that yes, a human could be doing that, but if we had robotics take on those aspects, it again frees up more time for that higher level thinking, and also really more querying what we're seeing from the robotics and automation side, that if we spend a lot of time working on those things that are highly repetitive, then we don't have quite the bandwidth to do the other stuff. And it's interesting for me because when I was in high school, I remember my senior year in high school taking a computer class where we were on these TRS-80s, and part of what we were programming the thing to do was like the hangman game and word searches, but it didn't have the analytical power that we have today with all of our computing. So it was really limiting. And then when I was in college, I had the first Apple Mac that was like a cube that didn't have a hard drive. So you had these little floppy disks that you put in if you wanted to save a file. So when I think about how far computational analytics has allowed us to go, it means that instead of the human having to do all these repetitive tasks, the computer is able to do those. So you can actually do a lot more analysis and comparisons than ever before. And I think that it allows us to actually run a lot more experiments with in a lot less time. And that's really exciting to me.
Yeah. I feel like, do you think that means that like the rate at which like technology and stuff is improving, do you think that rate is like improving since now we can focus more on, instead of repetitive little things?
Yeah, I do. And to me, what's interesting is I think that's actually part of the challenge. So if you think about humans and the human brain and our capacity for the pace of change, I think about the fact that the pace of change prior to all of the computers and computing and robotics and AI, that the pace was just a lot slower. And nowadays, the pace of change is so fast, right? If we think about what our smartphones were able to do even 5 years ago compared to today, and I think at times it's hard for our brains to catch up to the pace of technological advancements in a way that can be a little uncomfortable, right? And I think that to me is where we might need to just help people understand how to ride that wave of change that is just a lot faster than it's ever been.
Oh yeah, because I also feel like with that rate of change, it becomes harder to like consider stuff like ethics too along the way. So you kind of got to slow down and make sure you're really considering everything.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that we're always relying on information, right? So are we checking for misinformation, the accuracy of information? How do we give it context so that the information really gives the kind of value that it should? And I think that we're always going to potentially have misinterpretation of data. I just think that nowadays there's just a lot more of those streams that we just need to be cognizant of, because we could be working on something that ultimately is not actually helping in the way that we need, because the data led us down a path that really maybe wasn't the root cause issue we were trying to solve. And I think in a way it's probably like robotics, right? Something isn't quite working. How do you diagnose down to the root causes so you're fixing the very thing that gets your robot to, right, throw the ball or pick up a block or, whichever the tasks are that you're actually working on.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like robotics is sort of like a transition that can help people be more educated so that they can ride the wave and be up to date just with even the way of thinking that technology these days adopts. So what do you think should happen with our teams and communities to keep fostering this education?
I think the more time we spend together in collaboration, I think the more that we have mutual understanding and are able to improve what we do. I'd like to see how we can even do more to partner between the school district and businesses or City Hall or Bellevue College, and really think more holistically about how do we bring what you're doing more into the mainstream, because I think that it has not been the norm to create that kind of visibility and partnership, and I think that's where some of the benefits really are, is to broaden the outreach and the collaboration and the thinking.
Yeah.
Okay, and then going back to your past, what was your thinking process of getting your degree?
I would say that I had always loved math. And then when I was getting ready to start high school, I remember the physics teacher from high school, Mr. Moody, came to the middle school and talked about how fun the physics class was. And then when I got into his class, I just really enjoyed the learning and kind of that, scientific thinking. And then when I got into college, I really just fell in love with engineering, which is the practical applied side of science. And I actually went through a couple of kind of iterations of thinking about what I wanted to do. So initially I was like, oh, maybe I want to be an electrical engineer. And then I was thinking about industrial engineer because that whole kind of optimizing and process control, process thinking. However, when I had an opportunity to think about what civil engineers do, which is what building infrastructure and buildings that really serve society, that's when I just really fell in love with that discipline. And then I would say that after I was in research for Weyerhaeuser and then design for Berger ABAM engineers, I actually had an opportunity to take to have an assignment out in the field at the Port of Seattle at the airport, working on a construction project where I could take the engineering side along with really the applied of building with contractors. And that's when I really pivoted into this is how you build teams that solve problems and get things built. And that's where I've been for the last over 20 years. And so I really enjoy that part of how teams come together to solve problems. And ultimately, I think engineering has always been for me about a mindset of problem solving, which is sometimes the most challenging thing we work on is what problem are we actually trying to solve, right? Because we have lots of different solutions, but if we're not focusing on the right problem, then we can really make the situation worse. And I have just found that way of analytical engineering thinking is also applicable in many other areas, including my 6+ years on the city council, where when we think about public policy and making sure that we have both the rigor and the outreach and the community and stakeholdering, it also has a lot of elements of kind of engineering and problem solving and how we bring teams together for success. And then lastly, I would say, when I was in college, we had some projects that were team projects, but back then it was really more of individual contributor efforts. What I'm excited about is that I think that both at the middle school and high school and higher ed, that thinking is changing from individuals being tested for what you know versus how teams perform, because in reality, that's what life is like. We are rarely in spaces where we are ourselves the only one that's solving a problem, right? Whether it's on the city council with all 7 of us, or in our project teams in my day job at the Port of Seattle where I'm the chief engineer, right? We work together to solve problems. In fact, right, the contributions of many is always better than the contributions of one. And that was actually something that I was at a meeting earlier today and someone brought up, and just so true. Do you find that to be true in your school system too, and what you're doing?
Yeah, I feel like, especially in our team, it's important to foster the idea that no idea is stupid and every idea brings valuable insight, because there's always something that sparked that idea, and that's going to be important.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that I learned about a couple years ago is the notion of the 5 whys. Have you heard of it? So what the 5 whys is about querying your problem statement at 5 times so that you're getting to the root of what you're trying to solve. And what that really does is it says, so if we use a scenario like one of the public policy areas we work on is homelessness, right? So if we start to say, well, why do we have so much homelessness? We could say, oh, it's because people aren't housed. And we might then say, well, why are people unhoused? Oh, because we have some folks that are experiencing medical poverty. And we start to say, well, what are the root causes of that? And so we start to really dig into what are the true root causes of the very thing we're trying to solve, so that we're not just putting the Band-Aid on the surface issue, like the iceberg, but really getting into what are the root causes of why something isn't working. And I think in a similar way with STEAM and robotics, you're doing the same thing, right? If the robot doesn't work, how do you get to root causes of why it doesn't work? Is it because the battery died? Is it because, a program sentence didn't quite work because the do loop wasn't right? Or, was it that there was dust in one of the, circuit pieces? How do you really diagnose and then prevent it from happening again? And to me, I think that is the most exciting part is how do we prevent the kind of errors that happens in the work that we do, so that the next time around we are honing in on optimizing what we're doing. I'm not sure if that answered your question or not. I started going into many different paths.
No, I like how thorough you are.
Yeah.
What do you think is the most important value for a team? Like when you look for building a team, what do you think is the most important thing?
I would say valuing each team member's ideas, as you said, that there are no bad ideas, because when someone puts out an idea, there was something they were thinking about that created the space for them to bring that up. So how do we get to that mutual understanding about, tell me more about why you think this makes sense, and then we might start to get to some other essence that we may not be aware of. And to me, more and more, that creating a space where people feel safe doing that is really important, right? Because if we have a space where every time someone brings up an idea, there's a squelching of ideas. After a while, no one's going to want to bring up any ideas. And then the collaboration doesn't really happen. So I think some of these other things that we want to do requires us to set the kind of space where people are willing to be authentic and bring up ideas.
Yeah, adding on to our last question, what was your journey from an engineer to a council member? Because they feel like such different fields from the outside, but the way you explain it, they seem so interconnected.
Yeah, I would say that I think for me, it was actually both being an engineer and pivoting to overseeing construction where teams come together to solve problems. And then the part I hadn't talked about is that 20 years after I got my master's in engineering, I went back and got a degree from the Evans School on Public Policy. And I think that was when it stitched together for me. It's both the problem-solving rigor and the community outreach and the idea generation and really understanding what problem we're trying to solve, that those two came together for me, where I really felt like the skill sets I bring, my lived experience, and what I was interested in terms of serving the community. So I've always thought that as an elected official, it isn't showing up and saying, I really care about this one what, whether it's housing or sustainability or transportation. It's about the how we go about solving problems for the community, grounded in the community and the outreach, and the rigor of making sure that we're not actually doing any harm and that we're really helping the very people that we're trying to serve. And so that, I'm going to say, so the engineering kind of problem solving and the construction management and the public policy degree really created, I think, both halves that I get really excited about being able to serve on the city council and bring those pieces together. And I actually think more and more as students go through engineering and STEM, we actually need to interject more of the, right, how are we taking the things that we're doing for public good, right? And how do we work together in teams for success so that we don't, again, silo into these. So if you're in, STEAM, you're not really about the public policy or the public good, or you're not really about the team and the collaboration, that they actually do all live together. And I think because of that, I finally started listening to people saying, oh, have you ever thought about running for office? I was like, no, I don't know anybody that's in office other than at the Port of Seattle, we have 5 elected commissioners, so those were the only electeds I knew. And I didn't know them, they were just like the big bosses. But after a while, I started realizing that maybe part of leaning in is saying, oh, I do have skill sets I can offer. So am I just waiting for other people to get up off the couch and do something? Or maybe I need to step up myself and do that. So, So 7 years later, here I am.
Whoa. Do you think there was anyone who inspired you on that journey, on the way?
You know, it's really interesting. I have to say that I was in the same cohort for grad school for public policy as one of the staffers here in Bellevue. His name is Joseph Adriano. And after we graduated from the Evans School, he would send me these periodic messages saying, oh, there's an opening on the Planning Commission, there's an opening on Human Services, there's an opening on Transportation. And I finally thought, maybe it is something that I want to get involved in. And so that was actually 4 years, 3.5 years before I decided to run for office. And so I think about how, he was persistent in thinking that that was a space that I could lean into, that acts of service that I really care about. And I'm really grateful that he created that visibility to opportunities for me. And then the other person is actually that when I was thinking about running, the seat that was going to be vacated was Representative Vandana Slatter. And she gifted me with 3 hours of her time at a Starbucks over at Crossroads Mall. We sat and talked for like 3 hours. And at the end of that, she was like, I believe in you. You should run for my seat. And I realized that she also gave me that bit of her time of what it's like and interjected a bit of that confidence that I could do this. And so I leaned in. And I would say that the part that for folks that don't know, she is in the sciences as well. And so we just really connected. And then she was also a graduate from the Evans School. So we just felt like we really kind of understood each other from the get-go of being women of color in STEM.
Yeah, from what you've said, it feels like collaboration and just finding the right people is at the heart of everything. So what do you think? Do you think that's an issue in our community that we should try to resolve? And how do you think we could do that through our team?
Absolutely. And I would say that when I first went into engineering, there were very few women and very few women of color. So, and then my first job for the Weyerhaeuser Company, most of the group that I was in Forest Products Research and Development, they were all men other than the secretaries. That's what they were called at the time. And then there were 2 of us that were women of color that started as interns and then were hired as engineers. And I have to think back and say it was a really lonely time because there weren't very many of us. And what I'm excited about now is I think that we have been creating a space where we recognize that women are just as capable and just as interested in going into STEM, and that over time, the more that we see of others, the more we feel like if she can do it, I can do it. So I'm excited about that potential because I see more and more that girls don't feel like they don't belong, or phrase a different way, that when we start to see others, we feel like, hey, that's a space that I can feel really comfortable and belong. And that to me is really important. So my hope is that as we move forward, the STEM areas are not seen as spaces that girls would not want to be in. I will end with this one final story, and that is that when I was in college, they were offering these seminar and classes about the imposter syndrome. I don't know if you've heard of this. And I think back now, and I feel like that was like one of the worst things that we created for women, because we were literally training women to think that we were imposters. Right? Just think about that. I mean, back then, I was not really aware, and it was kind of like, oh, right? It's like, how do you overcome imposter syndrome? Fake it till you make it, and all these other phrases that now we're like going, hey, what's going on with that? But I can look back and say, how do we shine a light on the fact that we had these biases and perceptions and fallacies that women were literally subjected to, that I'm hoping as we move forward, we don't treat girls going into STEM as though they didn't belong and that they were somehow imposters. So to me, that is really important.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like at the root of it all, the why is representation, and that's what really matters. So for one final question, how have you worked with diversity, equity, inclusion in your job, and how do you think that applies?
I would say that it plays out in a number of different spaces. So when I think about my work at the Port of Seattle as chief engineer, over the years, we've done a lot to look at how do we grow and recruit and retain more women and people of color into the different jobs. And then as we're working with our designers and contractors, how are we looking at making sure that diverse businesses have access and opportunities to the kind of contracts for design or construction? How do we make sure that the consultants that we're bringing in are bringing us a diverse grouping of individuals and not just white men, which for a long time it seemed like that's what we were seeing. And then in Bellevue, one of the things we've been actively working on is how do we look at our hiring practices, how do we look at our contracts that the city has, and how do we make sure that we're creating access for people in our boards and commissions? How do we make sure that we have a diverse mix of individuals? How are we centering the marginalized or underserved communities? And how do we make sure we don't have language and access barriers, which is an important function? And then for me personally, it's been something that I am really grounded in. So some of the committees that I've been really involved with, for the city of Bellevue, I've been involved at the National League of Cities, where I was the co-chair of the Race, Equity, and Leadership Committee, where part of that work was working with other electeds from around the country about like what are the kind of policies we should be focusing on related to DEI and equity and the systemic racism that we have sometimes within our systems. And then I'm currently on the Association of Washington Cities on the DEI-B, so we actually have belonging as part of the title. The DEI-B cabinet, where some of that work is also talking about like how are we serving the community, and also as electeds, what's our own self-care look like for a number of us that are electeds of color. There are more and more representation of us, which is great. I think sometimes we can carry our own traumas of our lived experience, and so how do we make sure we're putting on our own oxygen mask before we can put the oxygen mask on for other people? And I think that's an important piece. And there's a long ways to go, and yet I feel like we've created a really good foundation for shining a light on the very issues that we might need to work on. Lastly, one of the things that I'm really excited about is in 2020, when Councilmember Jeremy Barksdale was on the council, he and I proposed starting a Communities of Color coordinating team where the focus of that committee is really on the voices that have not necessarily been heard, and really understanding what are the needs that the community has that we should be focusing on. And they have a preliminary kind of themes that they have created, and we should be getting a report here actually in the next couple of months. So I'm super excited about that, because that will lead into, in our 2025 to 2026 budget, where are the areas we might need to fund from our budget standpoint. So a really exciting time related to that. And then I believe that with Shamari Jones with the Bellevue School District, I mean, he's been also working on DEI efforts for many years. And I think there's more partnership we could be doing with the school district on this, and excited to see where some of those alignments might be.
Yeah,
That sounds exciting.
I'm excited to see how it all plays out in the
Well,
near
and I would
future.
say that for me, I always think about what does partnerships look like. So I'm really curious about, right from your standpoint, what do you see as the places where we're not doing enough with our DEI efforts? Because a lot of it is in the very systems that we work in. So if we're not working on removing the pain points from the system, we will get similar results, because the system was created with often bias and perceptions and issues.
Yeah, I think recognition is the most important. Recognizing people for everything they do, especially if they don't usually get recognized, if they're more quiet, if they're more reserved. And yeah.
I also think like representation in media, like whether it be like film or even just seeing people in all these roles, like I feel like that really helps people feel like I've seen this before, I can do this too. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, I feel like media is often more accessible too than just, or it's easier than just going out there. It's less scary if you saw someone else do it online first.
So do you think that with the advent of TikTok and Instagram and many other social media sources, that there's a way to see more representation than mainstream media, which sometimes can be hard to access? Or do you think it's not helped?
I think it's kind of hard to tell, but especially with TikTok and Instagram, they're so algorithm based. It's easy for the people who need, like, for people to see what they need to see, because the algorithm is catered more to you. So it can recognize who you are and show you more people like that and bring that sort of representation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. However, I think like an issue also with like social media and stuff like that is like, since people are anonymous, obviously they feel like they can just like put down communities a lot easier, especially in comments. Like people, they just like feel like there are no consequences, but I feel like in real life, people are less reluctant to do that in this age. So,
Okay.
I think
Yeah, I can see where that's kind of both the benefits and the kind of issues or challenges associated with the readily accessible social media platforms.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of balancing it, because it is such a novel sort of technology. And we're just so much more connected than before. It can be like a lot of pressure, but also it can spark hope.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, right? Because what I hear you saying in a little bit is that with some of the social media and even robotics and STEM and AI, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah.
And really kind of understanding the nuance of that fine line.
Yeah. I think education can help with that, just getting people more familiar with being ethical.
mm-hmm. And also like instilling those values at a younger age, because I feel like then you're more impressionable when you're like little. So I hope future generations, they're more open to equity and diversity and stuff like that.
Yeah, we try to do that through mentoring the FOL teams, but it's an ongoing process.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I really appreciate the work that you're doing and this conversation where I'm learning from you while we're just kind of sharing some of my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for your insight. I feel like it's been really valuable. Can't wait to go tell the team what we've learned about, because there was so much to it, the 5 whys, all of that.
There was so much wisdom. I feel like 10 times smarter now.
Well, I would love to come out and watch when you have competitions, or just, I know I've been to at least one of your meetings where you were, working on the robot and the marketing and the different things. And so, yeah, just let me know about other opportunities, because I think that the more that we connect our youth to adults in different fields, the more that we actually have this mutual sharing and understanding.
I agree. We'll definitely reach out when we have competitions or outreach events, because I think those are also really valuable, because you can see us interacting with all the other teams.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, this is great.